The certified letter shook in my hands as my brother's words cut through my heart like a blade. Grandpa would have wanted me to have it anyway. You know how he felt about girls and money. Just like that, my $50,000 inheritance check, my ticket to starting my veterinary clinic, my future I'd planned since I was 12, vanished into Derek's gambling debts and cocaine habit. The theft of my dreams happened on a Tuesday morning while I was at work, between him forging my signature and cashing the check at 3 different locations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sit in the waiting room of Westfield College's veterinary program, acceptance letter crisp in my portfolio, watching other students nervously fidget with their applications. The morning sun streams through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like possibilities in the air. My phone buzzes with a text from Carmen, my best friend since high school. Ready to change the world, Dr. Maya? The title still feels surreal, even though I've worked toward it for 8 years. This almost didn't happen. 6 months ago, my future was stolen before I even knew it was in danger. 6 months ago, I was Maya Chen, the responsible daughter who held our fractured family together with optimism and endless forgiveness. Our house in Riverside wasn't much to look at. A single-story ranch with a sagging porch and paint that had given up the fight against California sun years ago. But it sat on 2 acres that backed up to rolling hills, perfect for the animal sanctuary I dreamed of building since childhood. Dad, Robert Chen, had inherited Chen's auto repair from his father, along with a work ethic that demanded 16-hour days and a stubborn pride that refused to admit when things were falling apart. The shop occupied a corner lot on Riverside's main drag, wedged between a laundromat and a payday loan place. A location that told you everything you needed to know about our neighborhood's economic trajectory. Maya, customers trust you, he'd say, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. You've got Grandpa's way with people. Derek's got other talents. Those other talents apparently included charming money out of Mom's purse, talking his way out of 3 DUIs, and convincing everyone that his latest scheme would finally turn his life around. Derek, 2 years younger but somehow always treated as the family prince, possessed a golden smile and silver tongue that could make you forget he'd borrowed your last 20 until he was asking for 40 more. 23 years old and still living in his childhood bedroom surrounded by participation trophies and empty promises to get clean. Mom, Susan Chen, had perfected the art of seeing only what she could bear. Once an elementary school teacher with dreams of becoming a principal, she'd gradually shrunk her world to fit the confines of our dysfunction. "He's struggling," she'd whisper whenever Derek's latest crisis exploded across our kitchen table. "He needs our support, not judgment." Support. The word that had defined my entire childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. Support Derek through his gambling phase. Support Derek through his drinking phase. Support Derek through his cocaine phase. Support the family business when Derek's problems created financial crises. Support everyone's dreams except my own. That particular morning started like any other. I'd been up since 5 a.m. feeding the 3 rescue dogs and 2 cats that had somehow found their way to our property over the years. Dad always complained about the extra mouths, but I'd noticed him sneaking treats to Bandit, the 3-legged German Shepherd I'd found abandoned on Highway 101. The plan was simple, beautiful in its clarity. Grandpa Chen had left me $50,000 in his will, money he'd saved specifically for my veterinary education. Maya's got the gift, he'd told Dad the month before he died. Animals trust her, people trust her. She'll make something of herself. The inheritance combined with my scholarship to Westfield College's veterinary program and my savings from working at Riverside Animal Hospital would cover my education and leave enough for a down payment on a small practice. I'd been accepted to Westfield 3 months earlier after years of maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working 30 hours a week at the animal hospital. Dr. Martinez, my boss and mentor, had written a recommendation letter that made me cry in the clinic's break room. Maya possesses an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that cannot be taught, she had written. She's the type of veterinarian this profession desperately needs. Everything was falling into place. The inheritance check had arrived the previous Friday, certified mail requiring my signature. I'd held it like a sacred document, tracing my grandfather's careful handwriting on the memo line, "For Maya's future. Make Grandpa proud." I'd planned to deposit it Monday morning before work, but Derek had shown up Sunday night with another crisis that required family intervention. "I just need a few days to sort things out," he'd pleaded, pacing our living room like a caged animal. "The guys I owe, they're not patient people. They know where we live, where Maya works." His eyes, bloodshot and desperate, darted between Mom and Dad. "If I can't pay them back by Wednesday, they said they'd make it a family problem." The familiar dance began. Mom wringing her hands, Dad's jaw tightening with the weight of impossible choices, and me calculating how much money I could spare without destroying my own future. Again. "How much?" Dad asked. Though we all knew the question wasn't really about the amount. It was about how many times we could rebuild Derek's life before our own collapsed entirely. 15 grand, he mumbled. "I know it sounds like a lot, but I'd got a sure thing lined up. This guy I know, he's got connections in Las Vegas. One good weekend and I can pay everyone back, start fresh." I'd learned to recognize the rhythm of Derek's promises. They always started with desperation, moved through elaborate justification, and ended with assurances that this time would be different. This time he'd learned his lesson. This time he'd get clean. This time he'd make us all proud. "We don't have $15,000, Mom said quietly, but her eyes were already calculating, already running through the mental ledger of family assets that could be liquidated to save her youngest child. That's when Derek's gaze landed on me, and something cold settled in my stomach. "Maya's got that inheritance money," he said, as if commenting on the weather. "Grandpa always said family comes first." The room went silent, except for the kitchen clock's relentless ticking. I stared at my brother, searching for any sign that he understood what he was asking. That $50,000 wasn't just money. It was 8 years of sacrifice, a lifetime of dreams, my one chance to build something meaningful. "That's for veterinary school," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "You know that." Derek's expression shifted, desperation sharpening into something uglier. "Come on, Maya. It's not like you really need it. You're smart. You'll figure something else out. You always do." He turned to our parents, hands spread in appeal. "Tell her, Dad. Tell her what Grandpa would want." Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Mom studied her hands as if they held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. The silence stretched until it became a living thing, feeding on everything we weren't saying. "Maya will make her own decision," Dad finally said, but his tone suggested he'd already decided what that choice would be. I excused myself and went to my room, where the inheritance check lay on my desk next to veterinary school brochures and application materials. $50,000. My future in crisp, certified form. I picked it up, studying Grandpa's signature, remembering his calloused hands teaching me to bandage a stray cat's wounded paw when I was 7. "Animals can't speak for themselves," he'd said that day. "That's why they need people like you, Maya, people who listen with their hearts." I locked the check in my desk drawer and went to bed, hoping morning would bring clarity, solutions, or at least a miracle that didn't require choosing between my dreams and my family's survival. I should have known better. Derek had never met a locked door he couldn't charm his way through, a signature he couldn't forge, or a trust he couldn't break when desperation drove him past the point of caring about consequences. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real story, the one that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my family, my inheritance, and my grandfather's final gift, was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the false promise of routine. I'd spent the weekend in a haze of anxiety, the inheritance check burning like a guilty secret in my locked desk drawer. Derek had disappeared Sunday night after his dramatic plea, probably crashing at one of his friends' places to avoid the uncomfortable aftermath of his request. I told myself this was good. Distance would give everyone time to think. to find alternatives that didn't involve sacrificing my future. I should have known Derek never waited for alternatives when he could simply take what he needed. My shift at Riverside Animal Hospital started at 7, and Dr. Martinez had scheduled me to assist with a complicated surgery on a golden retriever that had eaten a sock. Complex cases like this reminded me why I'd fallen in love with veterinary medicine. The puzzle solving, the delicate precision, the moment when your skill and knowledge could literally save a life. "You're focused today," Dr. Martinez observed as we prepped for surgery. "That's good. Buster here needs our full attention." She'd been my mentor for 3 years, guiding me through everything from basic wound care to emergency surgeries. Her recommendation letter for veterinary school had been the key that unlocked my acceptance to Westfield. The surgery took 4 hours. Buster came through beautifully, his tail already wagging weakly as he emerged from anesthesia. I stayed with him during recovery, monitoring his vitals and whispering encouragement. Animals couldn't understand words, but they always seemed to know when someone cared. My phone buzzed around noon, a text from Mom. "Can you come home? We need to talk." The message felt ominous, weighted with the kind of family drama that usually preceded Derek-related catastrophes. I asked Dr. Martinez if I could leave early, explaining that a family emergency had come up. She took one look at my face and nodded. "Go," she said. "But Maya, whatever's happening, don't let it derail your dreams. You're too close to everything you've worked for." The drive home took 15 minutes, but felt like hours. Our house looked exactly the same. Peeling paint, sagging porch, Dad's work truck parked at an angle that suggested he'd been in a hurry. But something felt different, wrong. The air itself seemed thicker, charged with the electricity that preceded thunderstorms. I found my parents in the kitchen, sitting at opposite ends of our scarred wooden table like opposing armies maintaining an uneasy ceasefire. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Dad stared at his coffee cup as if it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Where's Derek?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Gone," Dad said without looking up. "Left early this morning, said he had some business to take care of." Mom's voice cracked when she spoke. "Maya, honey, sit down. We need to discuss something." I remained standing, suddenly aware of how the kitchen felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. "What kind of business?" Dad finally met my eyes, and I saw something there that I'd never seen before. Shame. Deep and raw and devastating. "He took the check, Maya. Your inheritance check." The words hit me like physical blows. "What do you mean he took it?" "He must have gotten into your room while we were sleeping," Mom whispered. "The desk drawer was forced open. The check is gone." I felt my knees give out, my body folding into the nearest chair without conscious decision. "You're saying Derek broke into my room and stole $50,000? "He left a note," Dad said, sliding a crumpled piece of paper across the table. Derek's handwriting, always messy, looked even more chaotic than usual. "Had to borrow Maya's check. We'll pay her back with interest once I take care of business in Vegas. She'll understand." D. Borrow. As if theft became acceptable when you promised eventual repayment, as if my future was a loan he could take without asking. "Did you call the police?" I heard myself ask, though my voice sounded distant, disconnected from my body. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. "We can't," Mom said softly. "He's our son, Maya. He's your brother." "He's a thief," I said, the words sharp enough to cut. "He stole $50,000. That's a felony." Dad's face hardened. "Family doesn't call the police on family. We handle our problems internally." "This isn't your problem to handle," I said, standing so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "This is my money, my future, my choice." But even as I said it, I knew the choice had already been made for me. Derek was somewhere in Nevada by now, probably already gambling away my veterinary school tuition at a blackjack table. The inheritance check that was supposed to secure my future had become his latest stake in a game he'd never learned how to win. We'll figure something out, Mom said, her voice carrying the hollow optimism of someone who'd been promising solutions to impossible problems for so long she'd stopped believing her own words. Maybe you could take a gap year, save up more money. A gap year? I repeated numbly. You want me to postpone veterinary school because Derek is a gambling addict who commits felonies to fund his habit? Don't talk about your brother that way, Dad snapped, his protective instincts still firing even in the face of Derek's betrayal. He's sick, Maya. He needs help, not judgment. He needs consequences, I shot back, and I need my inheritance back. Dad's jaw tightened. The money's gone, Maya. Derek cashed the check this morning at 3 different banks, used fake IDs, forged signatures. Professional operation. There was something almost admiring in his voice, as if Derek's criminal competence was worthy of respect. 3 different banks? I stared at him. You're telling me Derek had fake IDs and knew how to commit check fraud, and you think this was some desperate, spur-of-the-moment decision? Mom shifted uncomfortably. People do desperate things when they're cornered. People plan elaborate crimes when they're career criminals, I corrected. How long has Derek been forging documents? How many times has he stolen from us before this? The silence that followed answered my question more clearly than words ever could. I walked to my room on unsteady legs, staring at the forced dusk drawer that had contained my future until 12 hours ago. The lock was broken cleanly. Derek had used tools, taken his time, made sure he could get what he needed without waking anyone. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated theft. My acceptance letter to Westfield College's veterinary program lay scattered across the floor, presumably knocked aside during Derek's search. I gathered the pages carefully, smoothing out wrinkles, trying to hold on to the dream that was slipping through my fingers like sand. The program started in 2 months. Without the inheritance money, I couldn't afford tuition, housing, or basic living expenses. My scholarship covered 60% of costs, and my savings from working at the animal hospital would barely cover textbooks. I'd spent 3 years planning this precise financial equation, and Derek had destroyed it in a single morning. I called Westfield's financial aid office, explaining my situation in clinical terms that didn't convey the magnitude of what I lost. The counselor was sympathetic, but realistic. Without additional funding, you'd need to defer enrollment, she said gently. The good news is you can reapply next year. Your acceptance and scholarship should transfer. Next year. 12 more months of watching my dreams collect dust while Derek gambled away my grandfather's legacy in Las Vegas casinos. 12 more months of pretending theft was just another family crisis to be managed and forgotten. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by veterinary textbooks I'd bought in anticipation of starting school. Each book represented hours of research, careful budgeting, dreams of the veterinarian I'd become. Now they felt like monuments to my own naivete. Derek didn't return that night, or the next. No phone calls, no updates, no apologies. Just silence and the growing certainty that my inheritance, my future, was gone forever, fed into slot machines and poker games by a brother who'd never shown any respect for consequences. The days following Derek's theft blurred together in a haze of grief and disbelief. I moved through my routine at the animal hospital like a ghost, going through the motions of caring for patients while my own future lay in ruins. Dr. Martinez noticed immediately, my usual enthusiasm replaced by mechanical competence, my easy rapport with animals strained by the weight of loss. "You're here, but you're not here," she observed on Wednesday afternoon, as I cleaned kennels with the intensity of someone trying to scrub away more than just dirt. "What's eating at you, Maya?" I'd always been able to talk to Dr. Martinez about anything. School stress, family drama, career aspirations. But how do you explain that your brother had stolen your entire future over breakfast? How do you admit that your family chose protecting a criminal over supporting your dreams? Family stuff, I said lamely, focusing on disinfecting already spotless surfaces. Nothing I can't handle. Dr. Martinez studied me with the same careful attention she gave sick animals, looking beyond surface symptoms to identify the real problem. Maya, I've known you for 3 years. You've handled your family's stuff with more grace than most adults twice your age. This is different. She was right. Derek's previous crises had been expensive inconveniences that required creative problem solving and emotional management. This was surgical removal of my dreams, precise and devastating. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the casual way my family had accepted the theft as inevitable, another Derek-shaped storm to weather, rather than an active betrayal that demanded consequences. He took something that belonged to me, something important. Can you get it back? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not unless I want to destroy what's left of my family. That evening, I called Carmen Rodriguez, my best friend since sophomore year of high school. Carmen had always been my voice of reason, the person who could cut through family drama with surgical precision and remind me what normal relationships looked like. He did what? Carmen's voice rose 3 octaves when I explained Derek's morning adventure in check fraud. Maya, that's literally theft, like prison-level theft. I know. And your parents aren't pressing charges? They say family doesn't call the police on family. Carmen was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When she spoke again, her voice carried the controlled fury of someone choosing words carefully. Maya, listen to me very carefully. Your family is insane. Derek didn't borrow your inheritance. He stole it. That's not family loyalty. That's enabling criminal behavior. Hearing someone else voice what I'd been thinking felt like validation and betrayal simultaneously. Carmen was right, but she was also attacking the only family I had. It's complicated, I said weakly. No, it's not. Derek committed a felony. Your parents are accessories after the fact, and you're the victim who's being asked to smile and pretend it's normal. Carmen's background, daughter of a prosecutor and a victim's rights advocate, colored her perspective, but that didn't make her wrong. What am I supposed to do? If I report Derek, he goes to prison. Mom and Dad will never forgive me. The family falls apart completely. Maya, Carmen's voice softened. The family fell apart the moment Derek broke into your room and stole your future. You're just being asked to pretend it didn't happen. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Carmen's words echoing in my head. Part of me wanted to drive to the police station, immediately, file a report, watch Derek face real consequences for once in his privileged, destructive life. But another part, the part trained from childhood to prioritize family harmony over personal justice, recoiled from the idea of being responsible for my brother's imprisonment. The next morning brought a phone call that complicated everything further. Mom's voice was tight with barely controlled panic when she woke me at 6 a.m. Maya, Derek called. He's in trouble. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. What kind of trouble? He owes people money in Las Vegas, more than he won gambling. They're threatening him. Mom's words came in short, breathless bursts. He needs help, Maya. He needs us to wire him money, or they said they'll hurt him. The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Derek had stolen my inheritance to gamble, lost more than he'd stolen, and now needed additional money to pay off gambling debts accrued while spending my future on slot machines and poker tables. How much? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be impossible. $25,000, Mom whispered. I know it sounds like a lot, but Maya, they showed him pictures of what they do to people who don't pay. He's scared. Really scared this time.
Good, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Maybe being scared will teach him something about consequences. Maya, please. He's your brother. There it was again, the family loyalty card, played with the assumption that blood relation trumped all other considerations. Derek could steal, lie, cheat, and endanger everyone around him, but I was expected to subsidize his destruction because we shared DNA. Where exactly are we supposed to get $25,000, Mom? Derek already stole the only money in this family worth stealing. Mom was quiet for a long moment. Your father thinks we could take out a second mortgage on the house. I felt the room spin. You want to risk losing our home to pay Derek's gambling debts? After he stole my inheritance to create those debts in the first place? We can't just abandon him, Maya. What if they really hurt him? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, circular and exhausting. Mom pleading for family unity, me pointing out the insanity of rewarding theft with additional financial support. Finally, I hung up and called in sick to work. I couldn't face Dr. Martinez's concerned questions or pretend to care about animal welfare when my own life was disintegrating. I spent the day researching Derek's situation online, trying to understand exactly how much trouble he'd managed to create for himself in 72 hours. Las Vegas gambling debts, according to several legal websites, were notoriously difficult to escape. Casinos employed collection agencies that operated in legal gray areas, using intimidation tactics that stopped just short of actual violence. Derek had managed to get himself into exactly the kind of situation that required either immediate payment or serious legal intervention. And instead of facing consequences, he was calling home for another bailout funded by further destruction of our family's financial stability. By evening, I'd made a decision. I called Mom back and told her I'd drive to Las Vegas to bring Derek home. Not to pay his debts. I couldn't afford that even if I'd wanted to, but to extract him from the situation before it escalated further. "You'd do that?" Mom's relief was palpable. "Maya, thank you. I knew you'd come through for your brother." But as I packed a small bag for the drive to Nevada, I wasn't thinking about coming through for Derek. I was thinking about confronting him face to face, forcing him to explain how he could steal my dreams so casually, making him look me in the eye while I described exactly what his theft had cost. I wanted to see the man who'd broken into my room while I slept and destroyed my future for poker chips. I wanted to understand how someone I shared a childhood with could treat me like collateral damage in his endless war against consequences. What I didn't expect was that Derek's Las Vegas crisis would lead me to discoveries that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my inheritance, my grandfather, and the real reason $50,000 had been left to me in the first place. The theft that seems like the end of my story was actually just the beginning of a much larger, more complex narrative that had been unfolding for years without my knowledge. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important truths. I was about to learn that lesson firsthand.
The 6-hour drive to Las Vegas gave me plenty of time to rehearse the confrontation I'd been avoiding my entire life. For 25 years, I'd been the family peacekeeper, the responsible daughter who smoothed over Derek's disasters and absorbed everyone else's emotional debris. But something had shifted when he'd stolen my inheritance. A line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. I reached Las Vegas around midnight, the city's neon glow painting the desert in artificial daylight. Derek had texted Mom an address, a cheap motel off the strip where he was hiding from his creditors. The Sahara Inn looked exactly like the kind of place where dreams went to die, all peeling paint and flickering vacancy signs. Derek's room was on the second floor, accessible by an external staircase that creaked ominously under my weight. I knocked on the door marked 237, my heart hammering against my ribs. 3 months ago, I would have been here as his rescuer. Tonight, I was here as his victim. Maya? Derek's voice through the door sounded smaller than I remembered, stripped of its usual confident charm. Thank God you came. He opened the door, and I barely recognized the man standing before me.
Derek had always been handsome in an effortless way that made people overlook his flaws, but Vegas had taken the toll. His eyes were bloodshot and darting, his clothes wrinkled and stained, his hands shaking with the tremor of someone who'd been surviving on adrenaline and fear for too long. "You look terrible," I said, stepping into a room that smelled of cigarettes and desperation. "Thanks for the pep talk," Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Did Mom send money? Please tell me you brought money." I sat down in the room's single chair, a vinyl monstrosity that had seen better decades. I brought questions, starting with how you could steal $50,000 from your sister and not feel like a complete piece of garbage. Derek's face cycled through surprise, guilt, and finally defensive anger. "I left a note. I said I'd pay you back with interest." "I left a note?" I repeated slowly. "You committed felony theft and left a note. Like that makes it borrowing instead of grand larceny?" "Maya, come on. It's not like you really needed the money right away. Veterinary school doesn't start for 2 months." The casual dismissal of my dreams hit harder than any physical blow could have. "Derek, that money was my tuition, my housing, my meal plan, my entire future. And you gambled it away in 3 days." "I didn't gamble it away," Derek protested. "I had a system. It was working until..." "Until what? Until you realized that casinos are designed to separate addicts from their money as efficiently as possible?" I stood up, pacing the small room. "Derek, you stole my inheritance to fund a gambling binge. There's no version of that story that makes you the victim." Derek slumped onto the bed, head in his hands. "I know, okay? I know it was wrong. But Maya, these people I owe money to, they're not kidding around. They showed me photos of what happens to people who don't pay." "How much do you owe?" "47,000, he whispered. I stared at him. "You lost my $50,000 inheritance and managed to go negative by another 47,000? Derek, how is that even mathematically possible?" I kept doubling down, trying to win back what I'd lost. The house always offers credit when you're losing big. Derek's voice cracked. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could win everything back and pay you back and no one would ever have to know." The magnitude of his destruction was breathtaking. In 3 days, Derek had managed to lose my inheritance and create nearly $50,000 in additional debt to people who specialized in collecting from desperate gamblers. He'd taken a family financial crisis and transformed it into a potential family catastrophe. "Derek, even if Mom and Dad mortgage the house, we don't have $47,000 lying around. The auto shop barely covers its expenses. What exactly did you think was going to happen here?" Before Derek could answer, someone knocked on the door. Not the polite knock I'd used earlier, but the sharp, authoritative rap of someone who expected immediate compliance. "Room service," a voice called, but the tone suggested the opposite of hospitality. Derek's face went white. "They found me," he whispered. The knocking continued, more insistent now. "Mr. Chen, we know you're in there. Time to discuss your payment plan." Derek looked at me with the same expression he'd worn as a child when caught in elaborate lies, desperate and calculating, searching for someone else to solve the problem he'd created. "Maya, there's a fire exit at the end of the hall. You should go." "I'm not leaving you here. These aren't nice people, Maya. They won't care that you're innocent in all this." The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of keys jingling. Apparently, Derek's creditors had connections with motel management. "Mr. Chen," the voice called again, "we're coming in now. Please step away from the door." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The door opened to reveal 2 men in expensive suits that looked out of place in the Sahara Inn's shabby surroundings. The first was tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. The second was younger, broader, with the alert posture of someone trained in violence. "Mr. Chen," the older man said pleasantly, "and you must be the sister we've heard so much about.
Please, don't let us interrupt your family reunion. Derek stood slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. Mr. Castellanos, I told you I was working on getting the money. Yes, you mentioned something about family resources, Castellanos replied, his gaze shifting to me with professional interest. Though I have to say, your sister doesn't look like she's carrying $47,000 in cash. She's not involved in this, Derek said quickly. Maya, you should leave. But Castellanos held up a hand. Actually, I'd prefer if Maya stayed. We have some things to discuss that concern the entire Chen family. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't a simple debt collection visit. There was an undercurrent of knowledge, as if Castellanos knew more about our family situation than Derek had told him. I don't owe you anything, I said carefully. Derek's debts are Derek's responsibility. Castellanos smiled, and it was the kind of expression that made predators look friendly right before they struck. Miss Chen, I think you're operating under some misconceptions about your family's financial situation. Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss the complete picture. He gestured to his companion, who produced a folder from inside his jacket. You see, when someone owes us as much money as your brother does, we conduct thorough background checks. We need to understand all available assets, all potential revenue streams, all family connections that might be relevant to debt recovery. My stomach dropped. What kind of background checks? The thorough kind, Castellanos replied, opening the folder. For instance, we know about your recent inheritance, $50,000 from your grandfather's estate, money that your brother used to fund his rather unsuccessful gambling venture. Derek shot me a look of surprise. He'd apparently never mentioned the inheritance's origin to his creditors. We also know, Castellanos continued, about some very interesting provisions in your grandfather's will, provisions that suggest your inheritance wasn't quite as straightforward as you might have believed. The room felt like it was tilting. What provisions? Castellanos pulled out a document that looked official, legal, and completely unfamiliar. Miss Chen, according to our research, your grandfather's will contained specific instructions on how your inheritance was to be handled in the event of theft or misuse by family members. I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was hearing. That's impossible. I read the will. There was nothing about... You read a simplified version. The complete document, filed with the probate court, contains several interesting clauses that weren't included in the family copy, clauses that suggest your grandfather anticipated exactly the situation we find ourselves tonight. Derek looked as confused as I felt. What are you talking about? Castellanos smiled again, and this time there was something almost sympathetic in his expression. Your grandfather, Mr. Chen, was a very wise man who understood his family better than you might have realized. The inheritance he left Maya wasn't just money, it was a test, and the test results are about to be very illuminating for everyone involved. The silence in the motel room was deafening. Derek and I stared at Castellanos as if he'd just announced that gravity was optional and the sky was actually purple. A test? My grandfather had turned my inheritance into some kind of elaborate psychological experiment? I don't understand, I said slowly. You're telling me my grandfather planned for Derek to steal my inheritance? Castellanos gestured to his companion, who handed him another document. Not exactly planned, but certainly anticipated. Your grandfather spent considerable time with an estate planning attorney in the months before his death. The attorney specialized in what they called behavioral inheritance structures, wills designed to reveal family dynamics and test character under pressure. Derek laughed, but it sounded hollow and desperate. This is insane. Grandpa was a mechanic, not some psychological mastermind. Your grandfather was many things, Castellanos replied, including someone who'd watched his family dynamics for decades and recognized patterns that concerned him deeply. He opened the folder wider, revealing documents I'd never seen before. These are excerpts from the complete will, filed with probate court but never shared with your family. I moved closer, studying the legal language that seemed to describe a completely different inheritance than the one I'd understood. The text was dense and formal, but certain phrases stood out like highlighted warnings. In the event of theft or misappropriation by family members, and subject's response to betrayal will determine secondary provisions. This doesn't make sense, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would Grandpa create some elaborate test instead of just leaving me money for veterinary school? Castellanos sat down on Derek's bed, suddenly looking less like a threatening debt collector and more like someone delivering difficult news to people he actually cared about. Miss Chen, your grandfather was worried about your family's dysfunction. Specifically, he was concerned about Derek's gambling addiction and your parents' enabling behavior. But mostly, he was worried about you. About me? I felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. What was wrong with me? Nothing was wrong with you, Castellanos said gently. That was exactly the problem. You were so focused on being the perfect daughter, the family peacekeeper, the one who fixed everyone else's problems, that you'd never learned to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you. Derek shifted uncomfortably. This is crazy. Maya's fine. She's always been fine. She's been surviving, Castellanos corrected. There's a difference. Your grandfather watched Maya sacrifice her own needs, dreams, and well-being to manage your crises and your parents' unwillingness to set boundaries. He was afraid she'd spend her entire life being the family's designated victim. I sank into the room's single chair, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. So the inheritance was what? Some kind of trap? It was an opportunity, Castellano said. Your grandfather believed that only a significant betrayal would force you to recognize the toxic patterns in your family and give you the motivation to break free. The $50,000 was real, but it was never the point. The point was seeing how your family would respond to your good fortune and how you'd respond to their response. Derek's face had gone through several color changes during this explanation, finally settling on a sickly green. You're saying Grandpa wanted me to steal Maya's money? He predicted you would steal Maya's money, Castellanos clarified, just like he predicted your parents would refuse to press charges, refuse to hold you accountable, and expect Maya to absorb the loss in the name of family harmony. The accuracy of those predictions was so precise, it felt like someone had been watching our family through a window for years, taking notes on our most destructive patterns. Grandpa knew exactly how this would play out because he'd watched variations of the same story unfold countless times throughout our childhood. But that still doesn't explain who you are, I said, looking at Castellanos with new suspicion. You're not really Derek's debt collectors, are you? Castellanos smiled and reached into his jacket, producing a business card. Harrison and Associates, Estate Planning and Family Intervention Services. I'm Michael Harrison, and I've been managing the secondary provisions of your grandfather's will since the moment Derek cashed your inheritance check. Derek's jaw dropped. You mean the gambling debts aren't real?
Oh, they're very real, Harrison assured him. We arranged for you to have access to credit at several casinos, and you took full advantage. The debts exist. The consequences are genuine, and the collection agencies are absolutely legitimate. We just happen to be working with them to ensure the educational value of your experience. I felt like I was watching a movie where the plot kept changing every 5 minutes. You're telling me that Derek's gambling crisis was orchestrated? We provided opportunities, Harrison explained. Derek made his own choices. We simply ensured that those choices would have real consequences rather than being absorbed and minimized by family-enabling patterns. Derek looked like he was about to be sick. How much do I actually owe? Harrison consulted his papers. $47,000 to 3 different Las Vegas casinos, plus interest and collection fees. All legitimate debts that will need to be resolved through proper channels. And if I can't pay, then you'll face the same consequences as any other gambling addict who overextends himself in Las Vegas. Wage garnishment
asset seizure, potential bankruptcy proceedings. The casinos are quite experienced in debt recovery. The room spun as I tried to process the magnitude of what I was learning. My grandfather hadn't just left me money, he'd designed an elaborate psychological experiment to force our family to confront decades of dysfunction. Derek's theft wasn't a betrayal, it was a predicted outcome. My parents' response wasn't disappointingly typical, it was precisely what Grandpa had expected. But why? I asked. Why go through all this instead of just talking to us about the problems he saw? Harrison's expression softened. Your grandfather tried talking to your family for years. He watched you sacrifice scholarship opportunities to work extra hours when Derek's gambling created financial crises. He saw you postpone your own dreams repeatedly to manage his disasters. He realized that gentle intervention wasn't going to change patterns that had been entrenched for decades. So he decided to blow up our family instead? He decided to give you information, Harrison corrected. Clear, undeniable evidence of how your family treats you when their interests conflict with yours. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. Derek suddenly stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. This is insane! Grandpa's dead. He can't control our lives from beyond the grave. He's not controlling anything, Harrison said calmly. He's revealing what was already there. Your gambling addiction was already destroying your family's financial stability. Your parents were already prioritizing your immediate needs over Maya's long-term dreams. Maya was already sacrificing her own well-being to maintain family harmony. The inheritance simply made these patterns visible and undeniable. I stared at the documents in Harrison's folder, trying to absorb the implications of what I was learning. What happens now? Harrison reached into his briefcase and produced another envelope, this one bearing my name in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. Now you read the letter your grandfather wrote specifically for this moment, the moment when you'd learned the truth about how your family operates and had to decide what kind of life you wanted to build going forward. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Grandpa's careful script. Maya, if you're reading this, it means Derek took the money and your parents let him get away with it. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but some lessons can only be learned through experience. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?
I read Grandpa's letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated my consciousness. The handwriting was unmistakably his, the same careful script that had labeled birthday cards and written grocery lists throughout my childhood. But the message felt like it came from a stranger, someone who'd been watching our family with clinical detachment rather than grandfatherly love. Maya? Derek's voice seemed to come from very far away. What does it say? I looked up to find both Derek and Harrison watching me with expressions of concern. Derek's face was pale with what I assumed was guilt, though I was beginning to question whether anything about this situation was what it appeared to be. It says Grandpa knew exactly how this would happen, I said slowly. He knew you'd steal the money, knew Mom and Dad would let you get away with it, and planned for all of it. Derek slumped back onto the bed. I don't understand. If he knew I had a gambling problem, why didn't he just refuse to leave money where I could take it? Why set up this elaborate trap? Harrison answered before I could. Because the trap wasn't for you, Derek. It was for Maya. Your grandfather needed her to see your family's dysfunction clearly enough to finally prioritize her own well-being. So Derek destroying his life with gambling debts was just collateral damage? I asked, my voice sharper than I had intended. Derek was destroying his life with gambling debts long before this inheritance. Your grandfather's plan didn't create Derek's addiction. It simply ensured that this time Derek would face real consequences instead of being rescued by family money. I stood up and walked to the motel room's single window, staring out at the neon glow of Las Vegas. 24 hours ago, I'd been Maya Chen, responsible daughter and aspiring veterinarian, whose biggest problem was figuring out how to afford textbooks. Now, I was, apparently, the subject of an elaborate psychological experiment designed by my dead grandfather to prove that my family was toxic. The worst part was how accurate the predictions had been. Derek had stolen my money exactly as anticipated. Mom and Dad had refused to press charges, exactly as expected. They'd asked me to absorb the loss, exactly as Grandpa had known they would. Every detail of our family's response had been choreographed by someone who understood our dysfunction better than we understood it ourselves. "This letter," I said, holding up Grandpa's note. "Is there more?" Harrison nodded and produced another document from his seemingly endless folder. "Your grandfather wrote extensively about his concerns regarding your family dynamics. He documented patterns he'd observed over years of watching you sacrifice your own needs to manage other people's crises." The document was several pages long, written in Grandpa's precise handwriting, but with the tone of a clinical assessment rather than a personal letter. As I read, I felt like I was viewing my own life through a stranger's eyes. Maya consistently prioritizes family harmony over personal justice. When Derek's gambling created financial crisis in 2019, Maya postponed college applications to work full-time and help cover household expenses. When Derek crashed his car while intoxicated in 2020, Maya used her scholarship interview fund to help pay for repairs and legal fees. When Derek's addiction caused family stress in 2021, Maya transferred from a 4-year university to community college to remain close to home and provide emotional support. The list continued for 2 pages, documenting every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every time I'd chosen family stability over personal advancement. Reading it felt like being dissected by someone who cared about me, but had watched me make the same self-destructive choices repeatedly. "He was keeping a file on me," I said, my voice hollow. "My own grandfather was documenting my life like I was a research subject." "He was documenting patterns that worried him," Harrison corrected gently. "Maya, your grandfather loved you deeply, but he also recognized that your family's dysfunction was slowly destroying your potential. He wanted to give you the tools to break free." Derek had been unusually quiet during this revelation, but now he spoke up with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Maya, I never asked you to sacrifice your dreams for my problems." I turned to look at my brother. Really look at him, perhaps for the first time in years. Derek at 23 looked older than his age, worn down by addiction and the constant stress of managing consequences he'd never learned to face directly. But he also looked genuinely confused by our grandfather's assessment of our family dynamics. "You never asked," I agreed. "But you also never said no when I offered. You never told Mom and Dad to stop expecting me to fix your problems. You never once suggested that maybe your crises shouldn't automatically become my emergencies." Derek's expression shifted, as if he was seeing our family history from a new angle. "I thought you wanted to help. You always seemed so together, so capable of handling everything." "I handled everything because someone had to," I said, surprised by the emotion in my voice. "Because if I didn't, the family would fall apart. Because Mom and Dad were so focused on managing your addiction that they forgot they had another child who needed support too." The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of Las Vegas traffic. Harrison remained diplomatically quiet, allowing Derek and me to process 25 years of family dysfunction without professional commentary. "So what happens now?" Derek asked finally. "Do I go to jail for theft? Do I declare bankruptcy? Do I just disappear and let you all move on without me?" Harrison consulted his documents. "That depends on Maya's decision. Your grandfather's will includes several possible outcomes based on how Maya chooses to respond to the situation." I stared at him. "More choices? More tests?" "More opportunities," Harrison corrected. "Your grandfather believed that giving you information about your family's patterns was only the first step. The second step was empowering you to make decisions based on that information rather than old habits of self-sacrifice." "What kind of decisions?" Harrison produced yet another document. Option 1, Derek faces full legal consequences for theft. You press charges, he goes to prison, the family deals with the aftermath. Option 2, Derek enters a legitimate treatment program for gambling addiction, works to pay back the Las Vegas debts through structured employment, and the family participates in counseling to address enabling patterns. Option 3, things continue as they always have, with Derek's problems being absorbed and managed by everyone else. I looked at the options, each representing a different future for our family. Option 1 felt like justice, but would destroy any possibility of healing. Option 2 felt like hope, but required everyone to acknowledge problems they'd been denying for years. Option 3 felt familiar, but would guarantee that nothing would change. And my inheritance? My veterinary school plans? Harrison smiled for the first time since entering the motel room. Your grandfather was many things, but he wasn't cruel. Regardless of which option you choose, there are resources available to ensure your education proceeds as planned. The $50,000 Derek stole was never your only path to veterinary school. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. You mean there's more money? There's much more, Maya. But accessing it requires you to demonstrate that you've learned to prioritize your own well-being over family dysfunction. Your grandfather's final gift isn't money. It's the chance to build a life free from the patterns that have held you back for 25 years.
The weight of my grandfather's final gift settled over me like a heavy blanket, protective but suffocating in its implications. For 25 years, I'd defined myself through my family relationships. The responsible daughter, the peacemaking sister, the one who held everything together. Now I was being asked to choose a future that might require letting that identity go entirely. I need time to think, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew time wouldn't change the fundamental choice I was facing. Either I continued enabling Derek's destruction while sacrificing my own dreams, or I finally prioritized my well-being over family harmony. Harrison nodded understandingly. Your grandfather anticipated you'd need time to process this information. He arranged for a week's grace period before any decisions become final. Derek's debts won't be called in, and your veterinary school enrollment can be deferred if necessary. A week! Derek repeated numbly. To decide whether my sister sends me to prison or not? To decide whether you finally face consequences for your actions, I corrected, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Derek, you stole $50,000. The fact that Grandpa predicted it doesn't make it less of a crime. Derek flinched as if I'd slapped him. Maya, I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I never meant for it to go this far. You never mean for anything to go too far, I said. Years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. You didn't mean to crash your car while drunk. You didn't mean to lose Dad's business loan money at poker. You didn't mean to steal my inheritance check. But Derek, intention doesn't matter when the damage is done. Harrison watched our exchange with professional interest, occasionally making notes in his small notebook. Maya, your grandfather specifically mentioned that this conversation would be crucial. How you address Derek's apologies and excuses directly correlates to your ability to establish healthy boundaries going forward. Stop analyzing me, I snapped, my emotional control finally cracking. I'm not a lab rat in my dead grandfather's psychology experiment. I'm a person whose family has been lying to her for months about the nature of her own inheritance. You're right, Harrison said simply, and your anger is completely justified. Your grandfather's methods were unconventional, to say the least, but Maya, look around this room. Look at where Derek's choices have led him. Look at how your parents responded to his theft. Everything your grandfather predicted has come true exactly as he expected. I did look around the room, at Derek hunched over on the bed, exhausted and defeated,
At the cheap motel that represented how far he had fallen in 72 hours, at the documents that revealed years of careful observation and planning by someone who'd seen our family's destruction coming long before we acknowledged it ourselves. What would happen if I chose option 2, the treatment and counseling option? Harrison consulted his files. Derek would be enrolled in a 6-month residential gambling addiction program in Arizona. The family would participate in weekly counseling sessions addressing codependency and enabling behaviors. Derek's Las Vegas debts would be restructured into a manageable payment plan tied to his employment after treatment completion. And if he doesn't complete treatment, if he relapses, then option 1 becomes automatic. Criminal charges, restitution requirements, and Derek faces the full legal consequences of his theft. Derek's head shot up. So I'd be on probation, essentially. One mistake, and I go to prison anyway. One relapse, and you face the consequences you should have faced years ago, I corrected. Derek, you're 23 years old. How many more chances do you think you deserve? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us wanted to address directly. Derek had been getting second chances since he was 16 and first got caught stealing money from Mom's purse. 7 years of escalating behavior, each crisis followed by promises of change and brief periods of improvement before the next disaster. I know I've screwed up before, Derek said quietly. But Maya, this time feels different. Sitting in this room, realizing how far I've fallen, understanding that I destroyed your dreams for poker chips, it's like waking up from a nightmare. You've said that before, I reminded him. After the DUI, after losing Dad's loan money at poker, after every crisis, you always say this time is different. Because this time, someone I love suffered directly because of my choices, Derek said, his voice cracking. Maya, I stole your future. I can say I'm sorry 1,000,000 times, but that doesn't give you back what I took. I studied my brother's face, searching for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize over years of Derek's crises. But this time, something was different. The usual charm was absent, replaced by what looked like genuine horror at his own actions. Derek, do you understand what veterinary school meant to me? He nodded slowly. You've wanted to be a veterinarian since you were 7 and found that injured bird in our backyard. You've planned every detail of your life around that goal. Then explain to me how you could steal my tuition money and convince yourself it was borrowing. Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because I've never had to think about consequences before, he said finally. Every time I've screwed up, you or Mom or Dad found a way to fix it. I started believing that's how the world worked, that my problems were temporary because someone would always solve them for me. The honesty of his answer caught me off guard. For the first time in years, Derek was acknowledging his role in our family's dysfunction rather than deflecting blame or minimizing his actions. And now? I asked. Now I'm sitting in a Las Vegas motel room owing $47,000 to people who specialize in breaking kneecaps, Derek said with bitter humor. Now I understand that some problems don't get solved by other people's sacrifices. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Maya, your grandfather's notes suggest that Derek's recognition of consequences would be a crucial factor in your decision-making process. What you're hearing from your brother tonight represents either genuine insight or sophisticated manipulation designed to avoid accountability. How am I supposed to tell the difference? I asked. You're not. That's why option 2 includes professional monitoring and structured accountability. If Derek's insights are genuine, he'll demonstrate that through sustained behavior change. If they're manipulation, that will become apparent quickly in a residential treatment setting. I walked to the window again, watching Las Vegas continue its neon dance of artificial promises and inevitable losses. Somewhere in the city, other families were probably having similar conversations, confronting the damage caused by addiction, weighing love against accountability, trying to distinguish between genuine change and sophisticated excuses. There's something else, I said, turning back to face Derek and Harrison. Even if Derek gets clean, even if our family goes to counseling, What guarantee do I have that this won't happen again? That the next crisis won't require me to sacrifice something else? Harrison smiled approvingly. That's exactly the right question, Maya. Your grandfather specifically hoped you'd recognize that Derek's recovery, while important, doesn't automatically solve the larger family dynamics that enabled his behavior. So what does solve them? You do, Harrison said simply, by establishing boundaries that protect your own goals and well-being, regardless of what crises other family members create. By refusing to absorb other people's consequences, by prioritizing your own future even when that makes other people uncomfortable. The concept felt both liberating and terrifying. What would it mean to put myself first in a family that had always expected me to put everyone else's needs ahead of my own? What would happen to Mom and Dad if I stopped being their emotional mediator? What would happen to Derek if I stopped being his safety net? Derek, Maya, whatever you decide, I want you to know something. Grandpa was right about our family. We've been using you as a fix-it person for problems we should have been solving ourselves. That's not love. That's selfishness disguised as family loyalty. I stared at my brother, shocked by his clarity. Derek, I'm choosing option 2, he interrupted. If you'll let me. Not because I'm afraid of prison, but because you deserve to see me actually try to become someone worthy of your forgiveness. The decision he was making for himself changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't choosing Derek's fate. I was choosing my own response to his choice. The question wasn't whether Derek deserved another chance, but whether I was finally ready to prioritize my own well-being regardless of what anyone else decided. For the first time in my life, I had the power to determine my own future without considering everyone else's needs first. It was the most terrifying gift my grandfather could have given me.
The drive back to Riverside was the longest 6 hours of my life. Derek sat in the passenger seat, unusually quiet, while Harrison followed behind us in a rental car to ensure we actually made it home. The Nevada desert gave way to California hills, but the landscape change felt insignificant compared to the internal shift happening inside me. Derek had chosen treatment, but I still had to choose how to respond to our family's decades of dysfunction. More importantly, I had to face Mom and Dad with the truth about Grandpa's inheritance and their role in the elaborate psychological experiment I'd unknowingly been subjected to. "They're not going to believe it," Derek said as we passed the Welcome to Riverside sign. "Mom and Dad are going to think Harrison is some kind of con artist." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe they'll recognize the truth when they hear it." We pulled into our driveway at 8 p.m. to find both of our parents' cars parked haphazardly, as if they'd rushed home from work a moment they'd heard we were returning. The porch light was on, and I could see silhouettes moving behind the living room curtains. They'd been waiting for news about Derek's crisis, expecting me to return with either solutions or explanations for problems they'd helped create. Harrison parked behind us and approached with his ever-present folder of documents. "Are you ready for this conversation?" he asked me quietly. I wasn't. How could anyone be ready to tell their parents that their recently deceased father had orchestrated an elaborate psychological experiment to expose their family's toxic patterns? But ready or not, the conversation was happening. Mom opened the front door before we'd even reached the porch, her face cycling through relief, confusion, and suspicion as she took in our unlikely traveling companion. "Maya, thank God you're safe. Derek, are you hurt? Who is this man?" "We need to talk," I said, stepping into the living room where Dad was already rising from his recliner with the expression of someone preparing for battle. "All of us. It's about Derek's situation, but it's bigger than that." "Bigger how?" Dad asked, his protective instincts clearly triggered by Harrison's professional appearance and serious demeanor. "Maya, if this man is trying to sell you something—" "I'm not selling anything. I'm Michael Harrison from Harrison & Associates. I've been managing certain provisions of your father's will since Derek cashed Maya's inheritance check." The room went silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Ironic, given the circumstances. Mom sank onto the couch as if her legs had given out, while Dad's face went through several color changes before settling on suspicious red.
What provisions? Dad demanded. I read Dad's will. There was nothing about provisions or management companies. Harrison opened his folder with practiced efficiency. You read a simplified version created for family distribution. The complete will, filed with probate court, contained additional instructions that were designed to be implemented only under specific circumstances. What circumstances? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Theft of Maya's inheritance by a family member, followed by the family's refusal to press charges or hold the thief accountable, Harrison replied matter-of-factly. Dad's face went from red to purple. That's impossible. My father wouldn't. He didn't know Derek had gambling problems. Your father documented Derek's gambling addiction extensively, Harrison said, producing another set of papers. These are copies of conversations he had with neighbors, family friends, and local business owners about Derek's behavior. He knew about the poker games, the sports betting, the money borrowed and never repaid. He also knew about your family's pattern of enabling that behavior. I watched my parents process this information, seeing the exact sequence of emotions Grandpa probably predicted: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally the terrible recognition that someone they'd trusted had been watching their family disintegrate for years without intervention. "Show them the list," I said quietly. Harrison handed my parents the document I'd read in the motel room, Grandpa's detailed record of every sacrifice I'd made to manage Derek's crises and maintain family stability. Mom's face crumpled as she read about the scholarship money I'd given up, the college applications I'd delayed, the dreams I'd deferred to keep our family functional. "Maya," she whispered, "we didn't ask you to do these things." "You didn't have to ask. You just created situations where someone had to fix Derek's problems, then stood back and let me volunteer. Every time." Dad was reading over Mom's shoulder, his expression growing more defensive with each item on Grandpa's list. "This makes us sound like monsters. We were doing our best to hold the family together."
"By sacrificing Maya's future to manage Derek's addiction," Harrison observed. "Your father was concerned that this pattern would continue indefinitely unless something forced the family to confront its dysfunction. So he designed an elaborate trap to humiliate us?" Dad's voice rose with indignation. "He designed a test to give Maya information about how her family operates when her interests conflict with Derek's immediate needs," Harrison corrected. "The results speak for themselves." Derek had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up with a clarity that surprised everyone. "Dad, they're right. Grandpa was right. We've been using Maya as our family crisis manager for years, and she's been letting us because she thought that's what love looked like." Dad turned on Derek with fury I'd rarely seen from him. "Don't you dare blame your mother and me for your gambling addiction. We've done everything possible to help you." "Including taking Maya's college fund to pay for my rehab," Derek replied calmly. "Including expecting her to give up her inheritance to cover my debts." "Dad, when was the last time you asked Maya what she needed instead of telling her what the family needed from her?" The silence hung in the air like an accusation. I watched my father struggle to remember a single instance when my needs had taken priority over family crisis management. And I realized I couldn't remember one either. "Maya, you know we love you," Mom said desperately. "Everything we've done is to keep this family together." "At my expense," I said quietly. "Mom, when Derek crashed his car drunk, you asked me to give up my scholarship interview money for his legal fees. When he lost Dad's business loan gambling, you asked me to transfer to community college so I could work full-time and help with expenses. When he stole my inheritance, you asked me not to press charges because family doesn't call police on family. Every time Derek creates a crisis, I'm expected to absorb the consequences. Because you're strong," Dad said desperately. "Because you're capable of handling adversity. Derek is fragile. Derek is an adult man with a criminal addiction that you've been enabling for 7 years," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "And I'm a 25-year-old woman who's been sacrificing her own dreams to manage problems that aren't hers to solve." Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically.
Perhaps this would be a good time to discuss the options available moving forward. He explained the three choices exactly as he had in the motel room: legal consequences, structured treatment with family counseling, or continuation of existing patterns. As he spoke, I watched my parents' faces carefully, looking for signs of genuine understanding versus defensive resistance. Treatment and counseling, Mom said immediately. Obviously, we choose treatment and counseling. It's not we, I said firmly. It's Derek's choice and my choice. Derek has already chosen treatment. Now I have to decide whether I'm willing to participate in family counseling designed to address our enabling patterns. Dad's face showed the first crack in his defensive anger. Maya, what does that mean? You're talking like you might not choose to help your brother get better. I'm talking like I might finally choose to prioritize my own well-being over family dysfunction. Dad, Derek getting better is Derek's responsibility. My responsibility is building a life that doesn't require me to sacrifice my dreams every time someone else makes bad choices. The silence that followed was different from earlier silences. Heavier, more final. I could see my parents beginning to understand that this wasn't just about Derek's gambling or the stolen inheritance. This was about 25 years of family patterns that had taught me to value everyone else's needs above my own. "What do you want from us, Maya?" Mom asked, her voice small and defeated. "I want you to acknowledge that what Derek did was theft, not borrowing. I want you to admit that asking me to absorb the loss was unfair. I want you to recognize that my dreams matter as much as Derek's immediate needs." I paused, gathering courage for the hardest part. "And I want you to understand that if Derek relapses, if he creates another crisis, I won't be available to fix it." The words felt revolutionary, like declaring independence from a country I never realized was holding me prisoner. The weeks following our family confrontation passed in a blur of uncomfortable conversations, legal paperwork, and emotional recalibration. Derek entered the Arizona treatment facility on a Thursday morning, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. For the first time in 7 years, he was facing consequences without a family safety net, and the reality of that isolation was written across his face. "I'll call you when they allow phone privileges," he said as Harrison prepared to drive him to the airport. "Maya, I know words don't fix what I did, but I'm going to try to become someone worthy of your forgiveness." I hugged him goodbye, surprised by how natural the gesture felt despite everything that had happened. "Derek, I don't need you to earn my forgiveness. I need you to learn to forgive yourself without requiring everyone else to absorb your consequences." After Derek left, our house felt different, quieter, but also more honest. Mom and Dad moved through their routines with the careful politeness of people learning to navigate a relationship that had been fundamentally altered. The easy familiarity of our dysfunction had been replaced by something more awkward, but ultimately healthier. "Maya," Mom said one evening as I prepared dinner, a task I'd automatically taken over years ago but was now questioning. "Do you want me to cook tonight? I feel like I've forgotten how to take care of my own family." The admission was so raw and unexpected that I stopped chopping vegetables and really looked at my mother. She stood in the kitchen doorway with the expression of someone who just realized she'd been sleepwalking through her own life. "Mom, when did you stop cooking dinner?" She thought about it for a long moment. "I think it was around the time Derek started having problems and you started working extra hours to help with expenses. You were already doing so much and you seemed to enjoy cooking, so I just let you take over." "And how did that make you feel?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Grateful, relieved, and then guilty about feeling relieved. Maya, somewhere along the way, I stopped being your mother and started being Derek's crisis manager. I let you become the adult in this family while I focused all my attention on trying to fix your brother." It was the most honest conversation Mom and I had ever had about our family dynamics. For 25 years, we'd operated under the fiction that our roles had evolved naturally, that my increasing responsibility was simply a sign of maturity rather than a response to parental abdication. "Do you want to learn to cook dinner again?" I asked. Mom smiled through her tears. "I'd like that very much." The family counseling sessions, which began the following week, were simultaneously exhausting and revelatory. Our therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, no relation to my veterinary mentor, specialized in family systems and addiction recovery. She had the kind of direct, no-nonsense approach that made comfortable denial impossible. "Maya," said Dr. Martinez during our third session, "you've described a pattern where you consistently prioritize family stability over personal goals. Can you help me understand why family harmony became your responsibility?" I looked at my parents, who shifted uncomfortably under Dr. Martinez's clinical gaze. "Because if I didn't, everything would fall apart." "And who told you that maintaining family stability was your job?" "No one told me directly. It just became obvious that someone had to manage Derek's crises and keep everyone functional." Dr. Martinez made a note. "So, you assigned yourself the role of family caretaker based on your observation that the adults in your family weren't adequately managing their responsibilities." The words stung because they were so accurate. I had become the adult in our family not because anyone asked me to, but because the actual adults had abdicated their roles to focus on Derek's increasingly destructive behavior. "That's not fair," Dad protested. "We were dealing with Derek's addiction. Maya stepped up because she's responsible and capable." "Mr. Chen," Dr. Martinez said calmly, "Maya stepped up because you created a family crisis that required someone to step up, and she was the only person willing to sacrifice her own needs to maintain stability. That's not responsibility, that's survival." The sessions continued twice weekly for 2 months, each one peeling back another layer of dysfunction I'd normalized over decades of practice. We talked about codependency, enabling behaviors, and the difference between love and caretaking. We discussed how Derek's addiction had become the organizing principle around which our entire family operated, leaving no space for anyone else's needs or dreams. "Maya," Dr. Martinez asked during one particularly difficult session, "what would it look like for you to prioritize your own well-being without considering how that affects your family?" The question felt impossible to answer. For so long, I defined myself through my relationships with other people that imagining independent decision-making felt like trying to imagine breathing underwater. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never tried making decisions based only on what I want." "Then perhaps that's your homework assignment for this week. Make one decision, just one, based entirely on your own preferences without considering how it affects anyone else." That weekend, I made my first purely selfish decision in years. I enrolled in the Westfield College veterinary program for the spring semester. Not because it was financially practical, not because it fit with anyone else's timeline, not because it wouldn't disrupt family routines, but because it was what I wanted, more than anything else in the world. The funding, as Harrison had promised, materialized through a complex trust structure Grandpa had established years earlier. There was enough money not just for tuition and living expenses, but for the kind of educational experience I'd only dreamed about. Research opportunities, internships, even study abroad programs focused on wildlife veterinary medicine. "Maya," Dr. Martinez said when I announced my enrollment decision, "how does it feel to make a choice based purely on your own goals?" "Terrifying," I answered honestly. "And amazing. Like I'm finally becoming someone I've never been allowed to be." Mom and Dad's reactions to my veterinary school enrollment were complicated. Part of them felt proud of my achievement, but another part seemed threatened by my independence. For so long, our family had functioned with me as the responsible center around which everyone else's chaos orbited. My departure for veterinary school would require them to figure out how to function without a designated crisis manager. "What if Derek has problems while you're away at school?" Mom asked during one of our dinner conversations. Then Derek will need to figure out how to solve his problems without my intervention, and you and Dad will need to decide how to respond without expecting me to absorb the consequences. Dad looked uncomfortable. Maya, that sounds harsh. Derek is going to need family support when he gets out of treatment. Derek will have family support, I agreed, but he won't have a sister who sacrifices her own dreams to manage his relapses. There's a difference. The distinction was crucial. I could love Derek without enabling him. I could support his recovery without making myself responsible for his choices. I could be his sister without being his safety net. 3 months into Derek's treatment program, I received my first letter from him. His handwriting was steadier than I remembered, and his words carried a clarity that had been absent for years. Maya, I'm learning things about myself that I never wanted to face. My counselor says that addiction isn't just about drugs or gambling, it's about avoiding responsibility for your own life. I've been avoiding responsibility for 23 years, and you've been carrying the weight I should have been carrying myself. I don't know how to apologize for that, but I'm learning how to make sure it never happens again. I'm proud of you for choosing veterinary school. For the first time in our relationship, you're putting your dreams first. And I think that's exactly what Grandpa wanted to see. Reading Derek's letter, I realized that Grandpa's test had succeeded beyond what even he might have anticipated. Derek was learning accountability in treatment. Mom and Dad were learning to function as adults in counseling, and I was learning to prioritize my own well-being without guilt or apology. For the first time in my life, our family was operating from a foundation of individual responsibility rather than collective dysfunction. It was messier and more uncomfortable than our old patterns, but it was also honest in a way we'd never achieved before. The transformation wasn't complete. Healing decades of dysfunctional patterns takes more than a few months of counseling and good intentions. But for the first time, I could envision a future where my relationship with my family enhanced my life rather than limiting it. Grandpa's inheritance hadn't just given me money for veterinary school, it had given me permission to build a life that belonged entirely to me. I'm writing this from my dorm room at Westfield College, 18 months after Derek stole my inheritance check and accidentally triggered the most important learning experience of my life. Outside my window, veterinary students are heading to their clinical rotations, carrying the same nervous excitement I feel every morning when I remember that this dream is finally real. Derek completed his treatment program 9 months ago and moved into a sober living facility in Phoenix. He calls every Sunday. Our conversations now focused on his progress rather than his crises. Last month, he started working as a counselor at the same treatment center where he learned to face his addiction. There's something poetic about Derek using his experience with destructive patterns to help others break free from their own. Maya, he said during our most recent call, my sponsor told me something that made me think of Grandpa's test. He said that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, but only if you're willing to learn from it instead of repeat it. Derek's transformation hasn't been linear or easy. He's had moments of struggle, times when the old patterns of expecting family rescue reasserted themselves, but each time he's caught himself and chosen accountability over avoidance. The difference is that now our family responds to his struggles with support rather than enabling, boundaries rather than bailouts. Mom and Dad have changed too, though their transformation has been more gradual and sometimes resistant. Dad still struggles with his protective instincts toward Derek, occasionally suggesting that family loyalty should trump individual boundaries. But Mom has become surprisingly fierce about maintaining the new dynamics we've established through counseling. Maya's dreams matter as much as Derek's recovery, she told Dad last month when he suggested I should visit Derek more often. We spent 25 years teaching her that her needs came last. We're not going back to that pattern. Hearing my mother defend my boundaries felt like watching someone I'd never met before inhabit her familiar body. The woman who'd spent decades avoiding conflict to maintain family peace had learned to advocate for principles that sometimes made people uncomfortable. Dr. Martinez continues to work with our family, though our sessions are now monthly rather than weekly. The focus has shifted from crisis management to maintenance of healthy patterns. We're learning that functional families require conscious effort and regular recalibration, not just good intentions and wishful thinking. Maya, Dr. Martinez said during our last session, you've managed to maintain your own boundaries while supporting your family's growth. That's a sophisticated emotional skill that many people never develop. The compliment felt earned rather than empty. For the first time in my life, I was receiving recognition for taking care of myself rather than for sacrificing myself for others. The shift in perspective had taken months to internalize, but now it felt natural to prioritize my own well-being without guilt or apology. My academic performance at Westfield has exceeded even my own optimistic expectations. The combination of passion and freedom from family crisis management, has allowed me to throw myself into veterinary studies with an intensity I'd never been able to maintain before. My professors have commented on my focus and dedication, unaware that what they're observing is simply what happens when someone's dreams are finally given space to flourish. Last month, I was selected for a summer research program studying wildlife rehabilitation techniques. The program will take me to Costa Rica for 3 months, working with veterinarians who specialize in treating injured animals before releasing them back into their natural habitats. It's exactly the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed about but never believed was accessible to someone from my background. Maya, you should be proud of yourself, Carmen said when I called to share the news about Costa Rica. 2 years ago, you would have turned down this opportunity because Derek might need something or your parents might struggle without your support. She was right. The old Maya would have found reasons why leaving the country for 3 months was irresponsible, selfish, impractical. The new Maya recognized the opportunity as exactly what Grandpa had hoped I'd learn to embrace, chances to build expertise and experience that belonged entirely to me. Harrison and I maintain occasional contact, though his official role as estate manager concluded months ago. He's become something of a mentor, helping me understand the legal and financial aspects of the trust Grandpa established for my education and future veterinary practice.
Your grandfather would be proud of the choices you've made, Harrison said during our last meeting. The test was designed to give you information about your family dynamics. What you did with that information exceeded even his most optimistic projections. The full scope of Grandpa's planning still amazes me. The trust he established contains enough money not just for veterinary school, but for the animal sanctuary I've dreamed of building since childhood. There are funds for land acquisition, facility construction, and operational expenses for the first 5 years. Everything I need to create the life I've always envisioned, freed from the financial constraints that once made such dreams seem impossible. But the most valuable part of Grandpa's inheritance wasn't the money. It was the permission to prioritize my own life without feeling guilty about setting boundaries with people I love. The lesson that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that supporting family doesn't mean absorbing their consequences, that being responsible for my own choices doesn't make me responsible for everyone else's. I think about Derek's theft differently now. What felt like the worst betrayal of my life became the catalyst for the most important growth I've ever experienced. If Derek hadn't stolen my inheritance check, I might have continued enabling family dysfunction indefinitely, sacrificing my own potential to maintain the illusion of harmony. Instead, his theft forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about how our family operated and gave me the motivation to demand better for myself. Sometimes the people who hurt us accidentally give us exactly what we need to break free from patterns that were slowly destroying us. The veterinary clinic I'll open after graduation will be different from what I originally envisioned. Instead of the small practice I once planned, I'm designing a comprehensive animal rehabilitation center that combines veterinary medicine with wildlife conservation. It's a bigger dream than I'd ever allowed myself to imagine, made possible by Grandpa's financial support and the emotional freedom to think beyond crisis management. Last week, I received a letter from a college student in Oregon whose family situation mirrors what mine used to be. She'd heard my story through someone who knew someone who'd attended one of Dr. Martinez's workshops on family systems and addiction. Her letter was heartbreaking and familiar. The responsible daughter carrying everyone else's emotional weight, sacrificing her own dreams to maintain family stability. I wrote back immediately, sharing the lessons I'd learned about boundaries, enabling, and the difference between love and caretaking. I told her what I wish someone had told me years earlier, that her dreams matter as much as anyone else's problems, that family loyalty doesn't require self-sacrifice, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to rescue people from consequences they need to experience. If my story helps even one person recognize their own worth and stop sacrificing their future for other people's dysfunction, then everything I went through will have served a purpose beyond my own growth. Today marks exactly 18 months since Derek broke into my room and stole what I thought was my only path to veterinary school. Instead, his theft became my path to something much more valuable, a life built on my own choices rather than other people's needs, dreams pursued without apology, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided caretaking. The inheritance check Derek stole contained $50,000. The life I built after losing it is worth infinitely more. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.